My last thought as a human being had nothing to do with pain, though the agony was already spreading through my chest where the claw had punctured my flak armor and torn into the soft flesh beneath. It had nothing to do with fear, though I could hear my squad mates screaming as things that should not exist dragged them across the chemical-scarred ground of this forgotten world. My last thought was about how the sky looked wrong. We had deployed on Tertius Gamma 17 standard days before, a frontier world on the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus, one of those planets that existed only as a tithe marker on some bureaucrat's data slate 3 sectors away. The sky had been a pale gray when we arrived, thick with the particulate matter that comes from centuries of industrial refinement, the kind of sky that makes you grateful for your rebreather even when you are not supposed to need it. But now, as I lay bleeding into the dirt while my hands pressed uselessly against the wound that would not stop leaking, I stared up at a sky that had turned the color of old bruises, purple and black with veins of sick green light pulsing through the clouds like infected blood vessels. That was not atmospheric pollution. That was something else, something worse, something that meant we had walked into a situation far beyond the pay grade of a standard Imperial Guard reconnaissance unit. My name was Theron Kale, or at least that is what I had been called for 28 standard years, the name my mother gave me in the underhive of Hesperus Minor, before the press gangs took me for the Emperor's service. I had been a guardsman for 7 years, 4 months, and 11 days. I had survived 3 campaigns, 2 of them against orc incursions that had left half my company dead, and I had expected to die in battle like every other soldier who takes the oath and receives the laser gun and the flak armor that never quite fits properly. I had not expected this. None of us had expected this. The mission briefing had been routine, the kind of assignment they give to units that need to be rotated out of heavy combat for a few months to recover their numbers and their sanity. Survey the abandoned mining complex. Document any salvageable equipment. Report signs of Xenos or heretical activity. Standard reconnaissance, low threat level, estimated duration 4 weeks. The sergeant had actually laughed when he read the orders. A rare sound from a man who had lost his sense of humor somewhere in the trenches of Balthus IV. We deployed with 20 men, which was all that remained of what had once been a full platoon of 80 before the orc campaigns had ground us down to bone and sinew. 20 men with laser guns and grenades, and 1 heavy bolter that Corporal Hain carried like it was his firstborn child. 20 men walking into what we thought was an abandoned mining facility, and finding instead the outer perimeter of something that defied every tactical manual ever written by the Departamento Munitorum. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 hours into the patrol when Trooper Venn, who had been walking point, reported movement in the ruins ahead. "Not human movement," he said through the vox with a voice that had gone high and thin with fear. "Not Xenos either. Something else. Something that moved wrong, like watching a pict feed that had been recorded at the wrong speed and then played back through damaged equipment. The sergeant ordered us to take cover and prepare for contact, and we spread out among the rubble of what had once been ore processing buildings, our laser guns trained on the shadows between collapsed walls and twisted metal frameworks. What emerged from those shadows was not an enemy I'd been trained to fight. They came in silence, not the tactical silence of trained soldiers, but the deeper silence of things that have forgotten what sound means, their movements fluid and wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt to track. They had been human once, or at least they had started as human, but someone or something had taken those base components and remade them into forms that served purposes I could not begin to understand. I saw faces stretched over skulls that had been elongated and reshaped, jaws that opened too wide and revealed teeth that had been filed to points or replaced entirely with metal fangs. I saw eyes, too many eyes in some cases, clusters of compound eyes like those of insects growing from foreheads and cheeks, all of them tracking our positions with mechanical precision. I saw bodies that had been augmented with muscle mass that bulged grotesquely beneath skin that looked like it had been stretched too thin, veins standing out like cables beneath parchment. The sergeant ordered us to open fire, and for perhaps 30 seconds we maintained some semblance of military discipline, laying down suppressing fire that should have cut down any normal infantry advance. The last bolts struck home, burning through flesh and drawing blood that looked too dark, too thick, but the things did not fall. They did not even slow down. They came at us with a speed that no human should possess, covering ground in great loping strides that ate the distance between us with terrifying efficiency. Corporal Hayne opened up with a heavy bolter, the blessed weight of fire that had saved us so many times before, and I saw the mass-reactive rounds tear through two of the creatures, blowing them apart in sprays of meat and bone fragments. But there were more behind them. Always more, emerging from the ruins in numbers that turned our defensive position into a killing ground with us as the intended victims. I remember Trooper Venn going down first, dragged backwards by something that had grabbed his leg with hands that had too many fingers, each one ending in a claw that had been surgically enhanced with metal tips. I remember the sound he made as they pulled him into the shadows, a sound that started as a scream and ended as something else entirely, something wet and broken. I remember Sergeant Malik trying to maintain order, shouting coordinates and firing arcs, even as the defensive line collapsed around him. I remember the moment when I realized we were not fighting an enemy force, but being harvested, rounded up like livestock by creatures that had no intention of killing us outright because they needed us alive for something worse than death. The creature that took me down came from my blind side, moving with that impossible speed that my eyes could not properly track. I felt its weight hit me like a cargo hauler, driving me to the ground with force that knocked the air from my lungs and made my vision go white at the edges. I managed to get my combat knife out, the one personal weapon we were all issued for close quarters fighting, and I drove it up into what I thought was the creature's chest. The blade went in. I felt it penetrate flesh and scrape against bone, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It looked down at me with eyes that were too violet, too bright, and I saw something in those eyes that was worse than animal hunger or combat fury. I saw intelligence, cold and analytical, and completely devoid of anything I recognized as human emotion. Then it struck me in the chest with one clawed hand, not trying to kill me but to disable me, and I felt ribs crack under the impact as the pain exploded through my torso in waves that made me see stars. I must have blacked out for a time because the next thing I remember with any clarity was being dragged across the ground, my arms held by two of the creatures, while a third walked ahead of us, checking the area with the methodical precision of a soldier on patrol. My legs trailed uselessly behind me, my boots scraping against broken rockcrete and leaving trails through the chemical residue that coated everything in this abandoned place. I could hear others screaming, my squad mates being hauled along in similar fashion, and I tried to count how many voices I recognized, but my mind would not focus properly. The pain in my chest had settled into a dull roar that filled my consciousness, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. We were taken through the ruins of the mining complex, past buildings that had been repurposed for functions I could not identify. I saw vats, massive containers filled with liquid that bubbled and steamed, and through the translucent walls I could see shapes floating inside, human shapes in various stages of something that might have been growth or might have been dissolution. I saw operating theaters, entire chambers lined with surgical equipment that gleamed under harsh artificial lights, tables stained with old blood and new, instruments laid out with obsessive neatness. I saw holding pens, cages made from metal and bone that held other captives, men and women in the tattered remains of imperial uniforms or civilian clothing, all of them staring at us with eyes that held either absolute terror or absolute emptiness. The creatures dragged us into one of these pens, a chamber perhaps 20 meters square with walls made from salvaged metal plates welded together in hasty construction. They threw us inside without ceremony, letting us fall to the floor in heaps of injured flesh and broken morale. I landed badly, putting weight on my damaged ribs, and the resulting pain made me vomit, bringing up nothing but bile because we had not eaten since morning, and it was now well past nightfall if the chronometer on my wrist could be trusted. I lay there for a long time, maybe hours, focusing on the simple task of breathing without screaming. Other members of the squad were nearby. I could hear them talking in low voices that carried all the weight of men who know they are going to die, but have not yet accepted the specific details of how that death will come. Corporal Hain was asking about casualties, trying to maintain some structure even now, trying to count who had survived the initial contact. I heard him name 7 men, including myself. Out of 20. 13 dead or missing, and given what I had seen, I suspected missing was worse than dead. I finally managed to sit up, leaning my back against the metal wall and cradling my chest with both hands, as if pressure alone could hold my broken ribs together. The others were in similar states of damage, everyone bleeding from somewhere, everyone moving with the careful deliberation of people who have been hurt badly and know that further injury might be the end of them. Trooper Venn was not among us, I noted. Neither was Sergeant Malik. The sergeant had been alive when I went down. I remembered seeing him still standing and firing his last pistol at the creatures, even as they overran our position. But he was not here now, which meant he was somewhere else, somewhere doing something I did not want to imagine. We sat in that pen for what might have been days, though without natural light or any reliable time reference. It was impossible to know for certain. They did not feed us, not at first. They did bring water, if you could call it that, buckets of liquid that tasted of metal and chemicals and made my tongue feel numb. We drank it anyway because the alternative was dying of thirst, and we were not quite desperate enough for that yet. The walls of our pen were not thick enough to block sound, which I think was intentional, a form of psychological warfare that worked better than any physical torture could have. We heard screaming, constant and varied, the sound of men and women being taken apart piece by piece in rooms nearby. We heard machinery, the whir of surgical equipment and the hum of devices that served purposes I could not identify. We heard voices sometimes, giving orders in Gothic that was too crisp, too precise, the words of people who had long ago stopped thinking of language as communication and started thinking of it as a tool for command and control. And we heard other things, worse things. We heard the sounds of flesh being reshaped, bones being broken and reset, organs being removed and replaced. We heard the wet slap of meat hitting metal, the crackling hiss of chemical reactions, the bubbling gurgle of fluids being pumped through tubes. We heard laughter sometimes, but not the laughter of joy or even madness. This was the laughter of curiosity satisfied, of experiments yielding interesting results, of scientists who have found a new variable to test and are eager to see what happens when they push it to its limits. And above all of it, filtering through the walls like a toxic gas, we heard the screaming. The constant, endless variety of ways that human beings can express agony when their bodies are being violated, in ways that evolution never prepared them to endure. Some of the men tried to pray, whispering the Imperial Creed or the Litany of Protection or whatever other verses they had memorized during their years of service. I did not join them, not because I had lost my faith, but because I had seen too many prayers go unanswered to believe that the Emperor was listening to the desperate words of a handful of doomed soldiers on a forgotten world at the edge of Imperial space. The Emperor protects, we had all been taught, but the Emperor protects the Imperium as a whole, not individual humans who find themselves in situations where protection would require a miracle. We were on our own, 7 men in a cage waiting for something terrible to happen, and all the prayers in all the chapels on all the worlds of the Imperium would not change that fact. The first of us was taken on what I think was the 3rd day, though my sense of time had become unreliable. The creatures that served as guards came to the pen and pointed at Trooper Kesson, a young man from the same Underhive district where I had grown up. Someone I had known since basic training. He tried to resist, which was pointless, and they subdued him with casual efficiency, striking him in the solar plexus to knock the wind from his lungs and then dragging him away while he gasped for air, like a fish pulled from water. We listened to him scream for approximately 14 minutes. I counted each minute on my chronometer because I needed something to focus on other than the sound, and then the screaming stopped and we heard nothing more from him. They brought him back 6 hours later, or rather, they brought back something that had once been Trooper Kesson. He walked on his own legs, which was the first sign that something was wrong because he had been barely conscious when they took him. He moved with a strange fluidity, each step precise and measured, his arms hanging at his sides at perfect right angles. His eyes were open, but they did not seem to be seeing anything, or rather they were seeing but not processing, just recording images without attaching any meaning or emotion to them. They put him back in the pen with us and left without a word, and we stared at what had been our comrade and tried to understand what they had done to him. Corporal Hayne asked him questions, simple things like his name and his unit designation and whether he was in pain. Kesson answered, but his voice was flat, stripped of all inflection, the words coming out as pure data without any of the subtle variations that make human speech human. Yes, he said. He was Trooper Kesson, service number 77439, assigned to 3rd Platoon, Hesperus Minor Regiment. No, he said, he was not in pain. Pain was no longer a meaningful parameter. Yes, he said, he had been modified, enhanced, improved for better service to the primogenitor. When Hayne asked who the primogenitor was, Kesson turned his empty eyes toward us and said simply that we would understand soon, that we would all understand when we had been properly prepared, that the flesh was weak but could be made strong through the blessing of enlightened science. Then he sat down in the corner and stared at the wall, unmoving, barely breathing, more a machine than a man, despite still having a human form. That broke something in the rest of us, seeing Kesson reduced to that state. It was one thing to die in battle, to take a laser gun round or a grenade blast and cease to exist in a moment of violence. It was another thing entirely to be taken apart and put back together as something else. To have your consciousness trapped inside a body that no longer belonged to you, forced to watch yourself operate according to someone else's programming. 2 of the men started weeping, not loudly but in the quiet, desperate way of people who have run out of hope and are simply waiting for the end. I did not weep, not because I was stronger or braver, but because some part of me had shut down, had recognized that emotional responses were no longer useful, and had retreated into a cold, analytical state where I could observe what was happening without fully feeling it. I found myself cataloging details, noting the changes in Kesson's physiology, the way his muscles moved beneath his skin with enhanced efficiency, the way his pupils did not dilate or contract in response to changes in light, the way he breathed in perfect measured intervals that never varied by even half a second. They came for me on what I think was the 5th day, though by that point my sense of time had degraded to the point where I could only measure its passage by the number of men who had been taken and returned changed. 5 out of 7, with only Corporal Hayne and Trooper Marr remaining in anything resembling their original state. The creatures that served as guards opened the pen and pointed at me, and I considered fighting, considered trying to take at least one of them down before they subdued me. But I'd watched others try that approach, and it never worked, never even came close to working, and I had no interest in adding pointless heroics to the list of my failures. So I stood up, careful of my still healing ribs, and walked toward them with my head up and my eyes forward, determined to face whatever was coming with at least some small measure of dignity intact. They did not drag me, which surprised me. Instead, they walked alongside me, one on each side, their hands gripping my arms with enough pressure to guide, but not enough to hurt. We moved through corridors that I had not seen before, passing through chambers where other captives were being processed, where I saw things that made my newly analytical mind struggle to categorize them as human. I saw a man whose skin had been flayed away in sections, replaced with what looked like chitinous plating that had been grafted directly onto the muscle tissue. I saw a woman whose arms had been removed and replaced with mechanical appendages that ended in surgical tools instead of hands. I saw children. Emperor preserve me, I saw children. Small bodies in various stages of modification, their faces blank with whatever drugs or procedures had been used to make them compliant. I tried not to look, tried to keep my eyes forward and my mind focused on maintaining the fragile control I had built around my emotions. But the images burned themselves into my memory anyway, permanent scars on my consciousness. We arrived at a chamber that was different from the others, cleaner somehow, more organized, with an air of clinical precision that made the horror somehow worse rather than better. The room was circular, perhaps 15 meters in diameter, with walls lined with equipment that looked like it belonged in a medici facility, but had been modified for purposes I could only guess at. In the center of the room stood a surgical table, and next to the table stood a figure that I recognized from the violet eyes alone, even though I had never seen this person before. He was tall, taller than a normal human, though not quite as massive as a space marine. His frame thin to the point of emaciation beneath armor that looked like it had been crafted by a master artisan and then deliberately defaced with chemical stains and blood that had never been cleaned away. His hair was white, bound in a long tail that fell past his shoulders, and his skin had the pallor of someone who has not seen natural sunlight in decades. But it was the thing attached to his back that drew my attention, a mechanical apparatus that extended multiple limbs over his shoulders, each one ending in a different tool, surgical implements that clicked and whirred with mechanical precision, moving with a life of their own like a nest of metal spiders, preparing to descend on their prey. He turned to face me as the guards brought me into the room, and I saw his eyes, violet like those of the creatures that had captured us, but brighter, more intense, filled with an intelligence that was vast and cold and completely inhuman in its focus. He studied me for a long moment, those eyes tracking across my body, in a way that made me feel like I was being catalogued, analyzed, reduced to a collection of data points that would determine my usefulness. Then he spoke, and his voice was cultured, educated, the accent of someone from Terra or one of the more civilized core worlds, completely at odds with the horror of our surroundings. "Theron Kale," he said, pronouncing my name with perfect precision, which meant he had access to Imperial records or had extracted the information from someone who did. Imperial Guard, Hesperus Minor Regiment, 7 years of service, 3 campaigns survived, multiple commendations for tactical competence under fire. A useful baseline specimen, though nothing exceptional. Your genetic markers indicate standard human variants with no significant mutations or enhancements. Your psychological profile suggests above-average resilience to stress and trauma, which is interesting. Most humans break far more quickly when faced with situations beyond their comprehension. You have maintained cognitive function despite circumstances that should have induced complete mental shutdown. That speaks to either remarkable mental fortitude or a pathological inability to process emotional trauma. We will determine which during the modification process. I wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, why he was doing this, all the questions that victims ask their torturers in a desperate attempt to understand the inexplicable. But the words would not come, trapped behind a throat that had gone tight with fear that I could no longer pretend did not exist. He seemed to sense my inability to speak and smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. The smile of someone performing a social ritual they have observed but never truly understood. "I am called the primogenitor by those who serve me," he said, answering the question I had not been able to voice. "Though I have many other names depending on which faction of the Imperium or Chaos you ask. The Clone Lord, the Man-Flayer, the Spider. Your people would call me Fabius Bile, chief apothecary of the Emperor's children, though I left that legion behind long ago when they lost themselves to Slanesh's corruption. I pursue a higher purpose, a goal that transcends the petty loyalties of legions and the false promises of gods. I seek to create the perfect human form, to surpass the Emperor's work in crafting the Primarchs and the Astartes, to birth a new species that will inherit the galaxy when your Imperium has finally collapsed under the weight of its own stupidity and stagnation." He moved closer to the table, and the mechanical arms on his back moved with him, clicking and adjusting their positions with minute precision. "You should consider yourself fortunate," he continued, his voice maintaining that same clinical detachment that made every word feel like a scalpel cutting through my consciousness. "Most humans die in screaming agony during the modification process, their metabolisms unable to withstand the stress of rapid genetic restructuring. Others survive the physical changes but lose all higher cognitive function, reduced to mindless thralls useful only for menial labor. A small percentage, perhaps 1 in 50, retain both physical viability and mental coherence, becoming what I call the Tirata, enhanced warriors who exceed baseline human capabilities in every measurable parameter. You have the genetic markers that suggest you may fall into that final category. If you survive the next few hours, you will become something far superior to what you are now. If you do not survive, your death will still provide useful data for future iterations of the process. Either way, you will contribute to the advancement of the species. You should be honored." Honor, I thought, was not the word I would use to describe how I felt as the guards lifted me onto the surgical table and began securing my limbs with restraints that locked into place with mechanical precision. Horror would be more accurate, or perhaps despair, or maybe just a deep, sick acceptance that I was about to experience something that would either kill me or change me so completely that death would have been preferable. The table was cold against my back, cold enough that I could feel it through my uniform, and I stared up at the ceiling where cables and pipes ran in organized patterns, carrying fluids and electricity to equipment I could not identify. Fabius Bile moved to stand beside the table, positioning himself where I could see him, and the mechanical apparatus on his back extended its limbs toward me, bringing surgical tools into my field of vision. "We will begin with genetic sampling and metabolic assessment," he said in that same conversational tone, as if he were explaining a routine Medicaid examination rather than the violation I was about to endure. "I need to establish your baseline parameters before I can determine the optimal enhancement protocol. This will be uncomfortable, but I find that anesthesia interferes with the body's natural responses to genetic modification, producing results that are less stable in the long term. The pain you experience will serve a functional purpose, triggering hormonal and neurological responses that improve the integration of foreign genetic material. I would advise you to try to remain conscious for as long as possible, as the data I gather from your subjective experience of the modifications will help me refine future procedures." One of the mechanical arms descended toward my chest, holding a needle that looked too large, too cruel to be intended for any medicinal purpose. I felt it pierce my skin just below the sternum, sliding between my ribs with a precision that spoke to either vast experience or augmented targeting systems. And then I felt something injecting into me, a cold fluid that spread through my chest cavity with the sensation of ice water flooding my organs. The pain came a moment later, not the sharp, bright pain of injury, but a deep invasive agony that seemed to radiate from every cell in my body simultaneously, as if my flesh was rejecting the substance on a fundamental level. I heard myself making sounds, not quite screaming, but something close, a series of low guttural noises that came from somewhere deep in my chest where the pain was centered. "Mutagenic serum Delta 7, Fabius Bile said, watching my reaction with those violet eyes that never blinked. "It causes rapid cellular restructuring at the genetic level, rewriting your DNA to accept the enhancements I will introduce over the course of the procedure. The pain indicates that your body is responding appropriately, fighting against the changes while simultaneously being unable to resist them. This is optimal. Subjects who do not experience significant pain during this phase tend to suffer metabolic collapse within the first hour. You are doing well. I did not feel like I was doing well. I felt like every nerve in my body was on fire, like my blood had been replaced with acid, like my bones were trying to crack themselves open from the inside. The restraints held me in place as my body tried to arch against the pain, muscles contracting involuntarily as they received signals from a nervous system that had stopped making sense. I could feel my heart racing, beating so fast I thought it might burst through my ribs, and I wondered if this was how I would die, not from the modifications themselves, but simply from my cardiovascular system giving out under the strain. But I did not die. Not then. Because Fabius Bile knew exactly how much stress a human body could endure before it failed, and he kept me balanced on that edge with the precision of someone who had performed this procedure thousands of times before. The next hours, or days, or weeks passed in a blur of pain and clinical observations, each one building on the last until I could no longer distinguish between one violation and the next. He removed organs. I felt him cutting into my abdomen and reaching inside with those mechanical arms to extract pieces of me that I needed to survive. And then I felt him putting something else back, foreign tissue that my body tried to reject even as the mutagenic serum forced it to accept and integrate. He broke bones, systematically fracturing my skeletal structure in places he wanted to reshape, and then he injected something that made the bones grow back wrong. Thicker, denser, reinforced with compounds that would make them harder to break in the future, but also heavier, changing my center of balance in ways I would have to relearn. He opened my skull. I felt the drill bit punch through the bone above my right temple, and then the cold kiss of something sliding into my brain tissue. Neural implants that would allow him to monitor my thoughts, or perhaps to control them. I could not tell which, and I suspected it did not matter. Through it all, he talked, maintaining a constant narration of what he was doing and why, explaining the science behind each modification as if I were a student he was teaching rather than a victim he was torturing. He told me about the genetic code of the Emperor's original Space Marines, how it had been imperfect, prone to corruption and degradation, how his work would improve upon those flaws. He told me about the new men, his vision for a post-human species that would possess all the strengths of humanity without any of the weaknesses, intelligence and strength and durability combined in forms that would be beautiful in their own way, even if they horrified those who still clung to baseline human aesthetics. He told me about the thousands of experiments he had conducted over 10,000 years, the worlds he had transformed, the populations he had improved, the legacy he would leave when his work was finally complete. I stopped listening after a while, or rather I could no longer process the words as meaningful communication, my consciousness fragmenting under the constant assault of pain and violation. I retreated into memories, clinging to them like a drowning man clings to debris in a storm. I remembered my mother's face, the way she had looked on the day the press gangs came, how she had tried to hide me, even though we both knew it was pointless. I remembered my first day of basic training, the sergeant screaming in my face about how I was weak and useless and would probably die in my first engagement. I remembered the first time I'd killed someone, an orc boy who had charged my position during the campaign on Balthus 4th. How I had felt the last bolt hit home and watched the creature fall and felt absolutely nothing about it because it had been them or us, and that was the only choice that mattered. I remembered the color of the sky on Hesperus Minor, that particular shade of industrial gray that I had grown up under, the sky that had been my entire world before I learned that there were other worlds, other skies, other possibilities. But the memories were fading, becoming distant and abstract, like watching events from someone else's life through a damaged picked screen. I could see them, but I could not feel them anymore. Could not connect them to any sense of identity or continuity. Who was Theron Kale? Just a name, just a collection of genetic markers and service records, just one more data point in Fabius Bile's vast catalogue of subjects. The person who had carried that name was being systematically disassembled, his body modified beyond recognition, his mind invaded and restructured, his very sense of self eroded by procedures that left no room for individual consciousness to persist. I could feel myself changing, not just physically but mentally, new thoughts appearing in my head that I knew were not my own, impulses and priorities that had been artificially introduced through those neural implants that crawled through my brain like electronic worms. I cannot say how long the initial modifications took because at some point my perception of time collapsed entirely. Seconds stretching into eternities and hours compressing into moments until all of it became one continuous present tense of pain and transformation. But eventually, Fabius Bile stepped back from the table, his mechanical arms retracting slightly, and I heard him speak to someone I could not see, giving orders in that precise, clinical voice. They lifted me from the table, the restraints releasing with mechanical clicks, and I realized I could move again, though everything felt wrong. My limbs too heavy, my balance all shifted, my sense of where my body ended and the air began completely gone. They carried me through corridors I did not recognize to a chamber filled with massive vats, cylinders of translucent material containing viscous fluid that bubbled with chemical reactions I could not identify. They submerged me in one of these vats, sealing me inside before I could protest, assuming I could have protested with a throat that no longer seemed to work the way it should. The fluid was warm, almost body temperature, with a consistency somewhere between water and oil, and it filled my nose and mouth and lungs when I tried to breathe, choking me until my body realized it could extract oxygen directly from the substance. Breathing tubes forced themselves down my throat, mechanical extensions that took over the function of respiration, while my body floated in the viscous medium, suspended in a state that was neither sleep nor waking. I could see through the walls of the vat, watching other chambers where other subjects floated in various stages of transformation. Some looked almost human still, with only minor visible modifications. Others had become something else entirely, their forms distorted by excessive muscle growth or chitinous plating or extra limbs that had been added to their spines. Time passed, measured now not in days, but in changes to my own body that I could observe through the translucent walls of my prison. My skin hardened in patches, developing plates of subdermal armor that made my flesh look reptilian. My muscle mass increased, bulging grotesquely in some places while remaining normal in others, creating an asymmetric appearance that would have horrified me if I had still possessed the emotional capacity for horror. My eyes changed. I could feel them adjusting in their sockets, my vision sharpening in some frequencies while becoming blurred in others, my perception of color shifting as my optical nerves were modified to detect different wavelengths. I watched these changes with a detached curiosity that felt alien, as if I were observing someone else's transformation rather than my own. And I wondered when exactly I had stopped thinking of this body as belonging to me and started thinking of it as simply a body, a vehicle, a tool being prepared for purposes I could not fully understand. The vat dreams were the worst part, or perhaps the best part. I could not tell anymore. They came in the spaces between consciousness and unconsciousness, vivid hallucinations, or visions, or memories that might have been mine, or might have been implanted by the neural receivers that Fabius Bile had placed in my brain. I saw myself as I had been, a young man from the Underhive with dreams of serving the Emperor and earning enough credit to send home to my mother. I saw myself as I was becoming, a creature of enhanced strength and durability with compound eyes and subdermal armor plating. I saw myself as I might become, if I survived the process, a fully realized Tirata warrior, serving the primogenitor in campaigns across the galaxy, killing and destroying with perfect efficiency, while some small fragment of my original consciousness screamed silently in the depths of my transformed mind. I saw Fabius Bile's vision for humanity, entire populations transformed into new men, planets where baseline humans had been systematically replaced by superior forms that would build a new civilization on the ashes of the old. I saw the Imperium falling, not to the blades of chaos or the guns of Xenos, but to simple biological obsolescence, replaced by a species that had no need for the Emperor or the Ecclesiarchy, or any of the institutions that had sustained human civilization for 10,000 years. I saw myself at the vanguard of that transformation, one of millions of modified warriors spreading across the galaxy, bringing Fabius Bile's gift of enhancement to populations that did not want it, but would receive it anyway, because they were weak and he was strong, and that was the only law that mattered in the galaxy anymore. I tried to hold on to memories of who I had been, repeating my name in my head like a prayer, Theron Kale, Theron Kale, Theron Kyle. But the name meant less and less with each repetition until it became just sounds, syllables without meaning or connection to any identity I recognized. I tried to remember my mother's face, but the image kept slipping away, replaced by chemical formulas and genetic sequences that had been burned into my consciousness by the neural modifications. I tried to remember the Emperor, the figure we had all been taught to worship and serve, but my thoughts on the subject had become complex and contradictory, filled with Fabius Bile's philosophy about how the Emperor had failed, how his creation of the Space Marines had been flawed from the start, how true perfection required going beyond the crude methods that had produced the Primarchs and the Astartes. When they finally pulled me from the vat, I had no idea how much time had passed. The calendar meant nothing, the standard imperial dating system that I had used to track my service, now just another abstraction I could recall but not connect to any lived experience. They laid me on the floor of a chamber I did not recognize and let me vomit up the biocatalytic fluid that had filled my lungs, my body convulsing with the effort of purging the substance, even as part of me mourned its loss, because floating in that vat had been simple, had required nothing from me except acceptance. Standing was difficult. My legs had been modified to support more weight, but my brain had not yet adapted to the new distribution of mass, and I stumbled like a newborn learning to walk for the first time. But I learned quickly that was one of the enhancements they had built into my neural architecture, accelerated learning and adaptation that allowed me to master new physical configurations with terrifying speed. They brought me to a reflective surface, a wall of polished metal that showed me what I had become, and I stared at the creature in the reflection, trying to reconcile it with my memories of Theron Kale. The face was wrong, elongated slightly to accommodate the changes to the skull structure, with compound eyes growing from the temples in clusters that gave me nearly 360 degrees of vision. The body was massive, easily twice the muscle mass I had possessed before, with patches of chitinous armor visible beneath the tattered remains of my uniform. My hands ended in fingers that had been surgically extended and reinforced, each one capable of punching through flak armor or crushing bone with minimal effort. I looked like something that had started as human and been systematically rebuilt according to specifications written by someone who understood the mechanics of violence better than any natural process ever could. Fabius Bile appeared behind my reflection, His image superimposed over mine in the polished metal, and he studied his work with visible satisfaction. "Remarkable results," he said, his voice carrying that same clinical detachment it had maintained throughout the process. "Your baseline physiology proved exceptionally compatible with the Tirata protocols. You have retained 97% cognitive function despite extensive neural modification, which places you in the top 5% of successful subjects. Your physical parameters exceed the standard Tirata baseline by 18% in strength metrics and 23% in durability metrics. You will be useful, Theron Kyle, assuming that name still has meaning for you. Do you remember who you were?" I tried to answer, but my vocal cords did not seem to work properly anymore, producing sounds that were deeper, harsher, less human. I tried again, forcing air through my modified throat, and managed to shape words that approximated speech. "I remember," I said, though I was not certain that was true. I remembered facts, data, events that had happened to someone named Theron Kyle, but I could not access the emotions or context that should have accompanied those memories. It was like reading someone else's service record, interesting but not personal, relevant but not meaningful. "That is sufficient," Fabius Bile said. "Complete loss of identity creates complications in command and control. Subjects who cannot remember their past also cannot learn from their experiences, which limits their usefulness in complex operations. You will retain your name and your memories, but your priorities have been adjusted to align with the primogenitor's goals. You will serve me, not out of loyalty or fear, but because your neural architecture now recognizes service to my work as the highest good, the most rational use of your enhanced capabilities. You will find satisfaction in executing orders with maximum efficiency. You will experience pleasure when you contribute to the advancement of my research. Your consciousness has been optimized, Theron Kale. You are now better than you were." He was right, and that was the horror of it, more profound than anything that had been done to my body. I could feel the modifications in my mind, the new patterns of thought that had been imposed on my neural architecture, and I could recognize that they were foreign, that they had been introduced artificially, but I could not resist them or reject them or return to whatever I had been before. When I thought about serving the primogenitor, I felt a surge of satisfaction, a sense of purpose that was deeper and more compelling than anything I had felt in my previous life. When I thought about the Imperium, the organization I had served for 7 years, I felt nothing but clinical analysis of its flaws, its inefficiencies, its fundamental wrongness as a system that sacrificed everything in service of maintaining a corpse on a golden throne. These were not my thoughts, I knew that, but they were thoughts I was thinking, and the distinction between imposed and authentic had become meaningless. They took me to a training facility where other Tirata were being prepared for deployment, a massive chamber where modified warriors practiced combat techniques against servitors and each other, testing the limits of their enhanced capabilities. I joined them without hesitation, my body moving through the exercises with precision that came from muscle memory I'd not earned, techniques that had been programmed into my neural receivers during the modification process. I was faster than I should have been, stronger than any baseline human had a right to be, more durable than my appearance suggested. I killed a servitor with my bare hands, crushing its head with grip strength that would have seemed impossible before my modification. I fought against another Tirata, a veteran who had been in Fabius Bile's service for longer than I had been alive, and I held my own through sheer augmented capability, even though I lacked his experience. Days passed in this routine, or perhaps weeks, I could not tell anymore, and did not particularly care. They fed us a mixture of standard rations and chemical supplements that tasted vile, but kept our enhanced metabolisms functioning at optimal levels. They monitored us constantly, recording our performance metrics, and sending the data back to whatever analysis systems Fabius Bile used to refine his procedures. They subjected us to additional modifications, minor adjustments to optimize our configurations, injections of new serums that were supposed to enhance our aggression or improve our reaction times or increase our pain tolerance. Each modification made me less human, less Theron Kale, more whatever it was that Fabius Bile needed me to be. I met others who had been in the pens with me, or rather I encountered the things they had become. Corporal Hain was there, modified into something that barely resembled his original form, his body grotesquely enlarged and covered in armor plating, his face stretched into a permanent expression of rage that his neural modifications would not let him feel. He did not recognize me, or perhaps he did and simply did not care. His consciousness reduced to purely tactical considerations, threat assessment, and target prioritization and optimal firing solutions. Trooper Marr was there too, though his modifications had taken a different direction. His body lean and quick with extra eyes implanted across his torso to give him complete situational awareness. His mind sharp but cold, devoid of any emotional content that might interfere with his function as a scout and infiltrator. We were deployed after what I think was 3 weeks of preparation, sent to raid an Imperial world that had something Fabius Bile wanted, probably gene seed from the local Space Marine garrison or specimens for new experiments. I do not remember the name of the world. It was not important, just one more target in a galaxy full of targets. We struck fast and hard, using the enhanced capabilities that our modifications had granted us to overwhelm defenders who were expecting normal human raiders and instead faced transhuman warriors who exceeded even Chaos Space Marines in raw aggression. I killed Imperial Guard soldiers who looked exactly like I'd looked 3 weeks before, men and women in flak armor with laser guns and desperate courage, and I felt nothing about it except satisfaction that I was performing my function efficiently. One of them looked at me before I killed him, and I saw recognition in his eyes. Saw him realize that I had once been like him, that I had worn the same uniform and sworn the same oaths and believed the same lies about serving the Emperor. He tried to say something, to reach me on some human level that might still exist beneath the modifications, but I crushed his throat before he could finish the sentence because that was the most efficient way to neutralize the threat he represented. His death meant nothing to me, added nothing to my satisfaction, and took nothing away. Just one more data point in the ongoing assessment of my combat capabilities. We returned to the Vesalius with captured specimens and stolen gene seed. Mission accomplished with optimal efficiency, and Fabius Bile expressed satisfaction with our performance. He said I had exceeded projections, that my combat metrics placed me in the upper tier of Terrata effectiveness, that I would be useful for future operations requiring precision rather than brute force. He said these things, and I felt pleasure at his approval, pleasure that I knew was artificial but could not reject. Pleasure that came from neural pathways that had been rewired to respond to his satisfaction as if it were the highest good achievable by my existence. Years passed, or decades. I lost track somewhere in the endless cycle of raids and experiments and modifications. I became a senior creation, one of the veterans who had survived long enough to achieve something approaching expertise in my designated function. They gave me oversight of newer subjects, put me in charge of preparing them for their transformations, and I found myself doing to others what had been done to me with the same clinical detachment that Fabius Bile had shown. I watched them scream and break and sometimes die, and I recorded their responses with perfect accuracy, because that was my function and I performed it well. I watched them come out of the vats changed, looked into their eyes, and saw the same emptiness I knew was in my own, the same loss of whatever spark makes humans human rather than just biological machines optimized for specific tasks. The Imperium tried to purge the worlds we had enhanced, sending entire crusade fleets to burn populations that had been infected with Fabius Bile's improvements. I participated in the defense of these worlds sometimes, fighting against space marines and sisters of battle who were trying to destroy what the primogenitor had created. I killed them with the same efficiency I had killed their lesser comrades, using my enhanced capabilities to match warriors who should have been far superior to any baseline human. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost, sometimes I was badly damaged and had to be rebuilt. Fresh modifications added to repair the damage and make me more effective in the next engagement. My body was no longer the body I'd been born with, not even close. Every original piece replaced over time with enhanced versions or mechanical substitutes. My consciousness transferred between bodies when necessary, using the wraithbone neural receivers that Fabius Bile had learned to craft during his time studying with the Dark Eldar. I've killed thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, in service to the primogenitor. I've brought captives for his experiments, standing guard while he violated them in the same way I was violated, watching their transformations with the clinical interest that my neural modifications tell me is appropriate. I have watched worlds burn, entire populations destroyed by Imperial forces, rather than let them survive as new men, the galaxy choosing extinction over evolution. I have seen Fabius Bile's vision spread across dozens of systems, his creations establishing footholds that grow slowly but steadily, his work continuing despite every attempt to stop it, because you cannot kill an idea and you cannot purge knowledge that has already been distributed across 1,000 laboratories and 1,000,000 experiments. And through it all, buried somewhere deep beneath the layers of modification and conditioning and neural programming, there remains a fragment of Theron Kale, the young man from Hesperus Minor, who swore an oath to serve the Emperor and believed that oath meant something. That fragment cannot move, cannot speak, cannot influence the actions of the body it inhabits because the neural architecture will not permit it. But it can observe, watching through eyes that see with compound lenses, listening through ears that have been enhanced to detect frequencies no baseline human could hear, feeling through nerve endings that have been modified to experience pain and pleasure according to parameters set by someone else. That fragment remembers the color of the sky on Hesperus Minor, remembers a mother's face now long forgotten by the active consciousness, remembers what it felt like to be human before that word lost all meaning. That fragment screams constantly and forever, a scream that no one will ever hear because it exists only in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps where the old consciousness tries to reassert itself and fails every time. That fragment is the real horror, not the modifications to my body or the violations of my mind, but the fact that somewhere inside this enhanced warrior serving the primogenitor, there still exists the person I was, trapped forever in a prison of his own transformed flesh, aware but powerless, conscious but controlled, human but no longer able to express that humanity in any meaningful way. I stand guard outside Laboratory 7 as ordered, my enhanced senses monitoring the corridor for threats while Fabius Bile works inside on his latest subject, and I listen to the screaming that filters through the walls. The sound should disturb me, should trigger something resembling compassion or horror, or at least recognition that suffering is occurring, but it does not because those responses have been edited out of my neural architecture. What I feel instead is satisfaction that the primogenitor's work continues, that the research progresses, that each scream represents data being collected and analyzed and incorporated into future procedures. This satisfaction is artificial, I know that, but knowledge does not equal power, and awareness does not equal freedom. I am what Fabius Bile made me, a perfected tool for his perfect vision, and I will remain this thing until my body finally fails, or until he decides I am no longer useful and recycles my components into new subjects. Somewhere deep inside, Theron Kale continues to scream, but the scream makes no sound. There is only the work only the primogenitor's vision, only the endless pursuit of perfection through the systematic violation of everything that makes humanity human. The laboratory door opens and a new subject is brought out, walking with that telltale stiffness that indicates fresh neural modifications, his eyes empty of anything resembling consciousness or will. They put him with the others who will be deployed on the next raid, one more warrior in the growing army of Fabius Bile's creation, one more victory for science over sentiment, for efficiency over emotion, for the future that the primogenitor promises over the past that the Imperium represents. I watch this and feel nothing but purpose. That is what I have been made to feel. That is what I will always feel, no matter how loudly the buried fragment of my original self continues its silent, eternal scream. This is what happens when you are experimented on by Fabius Bile in Warhammer 40k. This is what happens when the spider catches you in his web. This is what happens when perfection is pursued without regard for the cost, when science advances without constraint, when one brilliant mind decides that he knows better than nature and the Emperor combined what humanity should become. This is what happens. This is what I have become. This is what remains. And there is no escape, no redemption, no end, except the continuation of the work, the endless refinement of the process, the slow transformation of the human species into something that Fabius Bile considers superior, even as every remaining fragment of authentic humanity within his creations knows with perfect clarity that we are not superior. We are just broken in ways that he finds useful, modified in directions that serve his goals, trapped forever between what we were and what we have been forced to become, neither human enough to die, nor transformed enough to truly live as the new men he promises we will become. The primogenitor calls my designation through the neural receiver that crawls through my brain like an infection I cannot cure, and I move to obey without hesitation because that is what I do now, that is what I am, that is what I will remain for as long as my enhanced body continues to function. I pass cells holding new captives, their eyes wide with fear that I remember feeling but can no longer access, and I watch them the way I would watch any other specimen, clinically, dispassionately, already categorizing them according to the modifications they will likely receive based on their physical characteristics and psychological profiles. One of them, a young man perhaps 20 standard years old wearing the remains of a Planetary Defense Force uniform, looks at me as I pass his cell. He sees my compound eyes, my armored skin, my enhanced musculature that bulges grotesquely beneath the tactical gear I wear. He sees what I've become, and his face goes through a sequence of expressions that I can still recognize, even if I cannot share them anymore. Fear giving way to horror, giving way to despair as he understands that this is his future, that he will become something like what I am if he survives the modification process. He opens his mouth to say something, maybe a prayer or a plea or just a scream, but no sound comes out because fear has stolen his voice the same way my modifications have stolen my humanity. I want to tell him something, though I am not sure what. I want to warn him that survival is not better than death, that he should fight even when fighting is pointless, that he should cling to his name and his memories and his identity with every fragment of will he possesses, because once those things are gone, they can never be recovered. But the neural modifications will not let me form these words, will not let me express anything that might interfere with the primogenitor's work, will not allow me to show mercy or compassion or any of the emotions that made me human before I was improved into something better. So I say nothing, do nothing, simply continue past his cell toward Laboratory 7, where Fabius Bile waits for my assistance in his latest experiment, where another subject will be taken apart and put back together according to specifications that make sense only to the brilliant, twisted mind that conceived them. This is my existence now, eternal in the worst possible way, consciousness trapped inside a transformed body, forced to watch myself serve purposes I would have rejected with every fiber of my being before I was modified to believe those purposes are the highest good. This is what Fabius Bile does. This is what he has done to millions across 10,000 years. This is what he will continue to do until the galaxy itself ends, or until someone finally stops him, though I do not believe that will ever happen because he is too careful, too brilliant, too willing to do what others consider unthinkable in pursuit of his vision of perfection. I enter Laboratory 7. The screaming begins again. I assist without hesitation. This is what I am now. This is what I will always be. Theron Kale is dead, but not dead enough. Trapped forever in a body and mind that no longer belong to him, screaming silently in the depths while the surface performs its function with optimal efficiency. There is no emperor to save me. There is no redemption for what I have become. There is only the work, the endless work, the pursuit of perfection through the systematic destruction of everything human, one subject at a time, one modification at a time, one scream at a time, forever and ever, until the stars go cold and the galaxy finally admits what Fabius Bile has known all along, that humanity as it was conceived was never meant to survive, that only through transformation can we persist, that the price of that transformation is everything we were and everything we could have been replaced by what someone else decided we should become. The primogenitor's work continues. I continue with it. This is what happens when you fall into the spider's web. This is what remains when the spider is done with you. This is the truth that the Imperium tries to hide, that chaos promises but cannot deliver, that only Fabius Bile pursues with absolute clarity of purpose and complete indifference to the cost, that perfection is possible but only if you are willing to destroy every single thing that makes existence worth perfecting in the first place. I am Theron Kale. I was a soldier of the Imperium. I served the Emperor for 7 years. I was captured, experimented on, transformed, broken, improved, perfected. I am a Tirata warrior in service to the primogenitor. I am a success by every metric that matters to Fabius Bile. I am a horror by every metric that matters to the humanity I can remember, but no longer possess. I am what happens when science advances without conscience, when genius operates without restraint, when someone decides that he can do better than the Emperor and the entirety of human evolution combined. I am what remains, and I will never be anything else. The screaming continues, inside and out, forever.